Welcome back to another YouTube video, and after the last Q&A I did, it went really well. Had really good feedback to it, so we're going to continue within that series and be a little more topical with it. And today we're going to do a Q&A specifically on gut cutting. And I chose this topic specifically because I was already debating making a video, kind of talking about the biggest mistakes I see and some frequently asked questions I get on gut cutting, just to kind of clarify some things that I may not have in the video. So it worked out perfect that we're going to do a Q&A on gut cutting so I can be able to answer a lot of the frequently asked questions, as well as touch on some specific things that I really wanted to touch on if I was to make a video on this, that I see people doing wrong or why they're kind of having issues with gut cutting or not seeing the results they're hoping for. Before getting into that though, and just like I said in the last gut cut video, this is not dietary recommendations. I am not a nutritionist. This is solely a strategy that necessarily isn't healthy per se, to try and make weight for powerlifting meets, I've even had people do it for jiu-jitsu and other weight class based things. This is a way to be able to lose weight in somewhat of an extreme manner that, as I detailed in the gut cut video, is likely the best way to go about it without losing performance, but it isn't necessarily healthy, so you should always do it at your own risk. I'm not recommending to do this, but if you're looking for some way to be able to cut for competition, this is a strategy people do utilize and can work successfully. So getting into the first question, it's really a three-parter because all three questions kind of go hand in hand. And yes, you're gonna see it on the screen, I did plant a question myself because, like I said, I was gonna make a video on this anyway, so I wanted to make sure this question was asked. So leading with that, what is the biggest mistake you see people make with the gut cut protocol? As well as the other two questions that kind of go along with this. Has the gut cut ever not worked? And if so, why? And then when does it not work? I'm assuming chronically low fiber diets, but want to know more if more. So basically mistakes people make, as well as like why it may not work even if you're not making a mistake. So mistake number one, and this was the main reason I wanted to make a video because I see this done a lot and it becomes kind of a big issue for some people, especially lighter weight class lifters who likely have a lower just caloric intake in general, is what you choose for your protein shake. I honestly can't remember because I made the video for gut cutting years ago and I haven't watched it myself, but I do think I kind of talked about like protein shakes or protein powders, not necessarily pre-made protein drinks, which tends to be what a lot of people do. And you can do that, but you have to check the sodium content. There's a couple pre-made protein shakes. I'm gonna put some nutrition labels on the screen. I think there's one by Premier Protein, the Fairlife Core Power. They have a lot of sodium, like 250 milligrams plus up to like 330 milligrams. You may be inadvertently sodium loading because of your choices with that. Because if you're doing salted almonds as well as all the other stuff you're eating, plus you're doing really, really high sodium protein shakes, you might be sodium loading and ruining your gut cut because of that. So my recommendation is one, making sure to check the nutrition label and at most keep the sodium per serving on your protein shakes at 160 milligrams or less. And most of the protein shakes I see kind of fit into that, of the pre-made ones, but really the best option, I'm going to include a nutrition label for this, is get some protein powder. Protein powder usually isn't as sodium filled. You can get them as low as 40 milligrams, but somewhere around that like 50 to 150 would be the best spot for most people. If you're going above that, you're probably inadvertently sodium loading. The next big mistake people make, and this one's kind of a no-brainer, is they don't track their calories or their liquids. And if they do, they just do it for a couple days and it's not really accurate. If you do not know your calories and you do not know your liquid intake, you're not going to have reliable results. I'm going to get to this in a little bit when we talk about fiber and some other things with food choices, but this gut cut specifically was made to be very easy for the masses to use. All you really need to know, the only barrier of entry, is what is your average caloric intake and then what is your average liquid intake. If you know those two things and you know them accurately, it should work decently well for you. If you do not know those things and you've never really tracked before and all you did is either one, guess, or two, track for 3 days prior and then use those numbers, it may not work well for you because those probably aren't very accurate. And then the third specific mistake I want to cover is the frequency I see people using ice cream now, like Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry's, solely for their carbs. That kind of became a fad, and if you remember watching my original video, I never really said to do that unless you're doing kind of a more extreme gut cut, and that's kind of like a last resort, because there's some issues that arise from that. One, dairy. Some people don't react well to that. More stomach discomfort, more issues with bloating, things like that. But more than anything, if you're gonna be doing ice cream solely for all of your carb calories for 3 days straight, most of what that is going to be turning into some kind of liquid. And so that is going to mess up the water load and liquid-based content, where you may think you're only doing a half gallon on the final day of your water load, but you're actually doing a gallon because you're eating a whole 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's or whatever it may be. So ice cream should not be the go-to. That is a last resort. That is what you use if you really, really need to cut heavy, and usually I use that maybe the last day or two. The vast majority of people I do the gut cut with, I'm doing some type of like high density, high volume, or high density calories, like cookies or sugary items like that. And my personal favorite is like some high density cookie like an Oreo, and then cover it with honey to get some extra sugar. But ice cream, not a bad thing, but I see it way overdone, and it kind of became a fad that everyone just does that and does it for all 3 days. And there's issues that arise from that, and I would not recommend it. So those were the mistakes, and now covering the other kind of 2 questions of when this might not work for someone, even though they're kind of doing it correctly, and it kind of intermixed in here is mistakes. But I've got 5 general reasons why I see this maybe not go as planned. The first reason, and this isn't necessarily the person's fault sometimes, is they're inadvertently sodium loading. Because within the gut cut I put out, I didn't necessarily base it around tracking sodium and whatnot, because honestly, most people don't know how much sodium they're having. So if I base a gut cut around sodium manipulation and how much you're having, a lot of people are going to mess that up because they don't even know what they're having in the first place. But you may be inadvertent sodium loading from 1, the protein shakes, 2, maybe you don't even realize you have a super low sodium diet, and now when you're eating salted almonds plus protein shakes plus all, you're having a lot more than you know you're having. So it may not even be your fault. You may be doing exactly what the gut cut says to do, but because of your prior sodium intake, it's actually making you sodium load now inadvertently, and now it's not working because of that, because you're retaining more water. Number 2 is you already eat like crap all the time. And as I notated in the original gut cut, you're eating very high density, high calorie per volume foods on purpose that aren't healthy. Like, you wouldn't ever do this diet purposefully. It's solely a weight cut performance based tactic and strategy to use. And if you already eat like you're 5 years old and eat candy and Uncrustables and ice cream and pizza every single day, and you don't eat very much whole foods and proteins and stuff like that, it's probably not gonna work because you don't have anything to gut cut, because you literally are already gut cutting on a daily basis. So vice versa, the more whole foods you eat, the more like regular protein from meat sources and vegetables and voluminous carbs, probably the more you're gonna get out of a gut cut. So notating that those people are it's gonna work better for, and the people who eat like crap all the time, it's probably not gonna do much for you. Number 3, this kind of goes back to the mistakes, is you've never tracked things correctly. It doesn't mean you didn't track things, you didn't track them correctly. It was guesstimates, you weren't weighing things. Even when you're doing the gut cut, you're just taking a handful of almonds and saying this is a serving. You have to weigh everything. If you don't, it may go wrong. And you can't guarantee that it's gonna work as it's needed. You have to be very precise with things to know exactly how many calories you were eating before. And then as you're doing the gut cut, you need to portion things out correctly. Reason number 4, I've seen it not work, is there seems to be some confusion sometimes that people misunderstand that, like, when you're water loading, that other liquids don't count. I thought I was pretty explicit in the video, but to clarify, all liquids that you intake should be within that. If you have coffee, if you have an energy drink, if you go have a diet soda, your protein shakes versus your regular water consumption, all of that, you have to drink a gallon, all of that is combined in there. And like I said, that's where even ice cream can come into be an issue, because that kind of turns into a liquid, and that kind of needs to be counted, but it's hard to be able to track. Any liquid is accounted for within that. It needs to be one thing within that gallon, not you get some coffee and then you also drink your gallon on top of that. Number 5 is you eat so little calories to begin with that gut cutting is not going to really do anything. So there's people, especially like lighter weight class females, that may not really get much out of it, because if you're only eating 1,300 calories and like you don't really have that much to gut cut in the first place. And so it may work a little bit, but you're only going to get maybe like a half kilo out of it, and it doesn't really do too much for you. So if you're not eating very many calories in the first place, and add on top of that, the other thing I mentioned as a possible reason it doesn't work, if you're eating like crap, you're probably not going to get anything out of the gut cut. There's just not enough to replace with the volume of food to now make it low volume. And then the last one is not having regular bowel movements. And that is a very, very common thing to happen. You are changing your diet a pretty drastic amount. Some people get constipated, they don't have regular bowel movements. And if you're not emptying your bowels, you're not getting rid of the poop. And that's the whole point of this, is trying to have low poop content within your intestines so that we're reducing that weight. Within that, there's some things you can do. I don't really want to give recommendations there, but that's just kind of one of the issues with some people who don't respond well to a gut cut. If you're going to get very constipated, you're not going to have bowel movements, and you're not able to basically empty your gut, it may not be a good strategy for you. It may be something that these food choices and the recommendations here are not going to work well with you, and it's just not a strategy you can use because you don't do well with these types of foods. All right, so moving on to the next question. That was going to be the long-winded one because I was trying to answer 3 questions in one. And like I said, that probably could be a whole video in its own. But for the next question, it's a bit more simple. The next one, which I actually got multiple questions on this, are what are the considerations for an athlete who regularly eats a low-fiber diet? The answer to that is absolutely nothing. If you remember back to the gut cut video, this is not based on fiber. There are gut cuts that are based on fiber, but I specifically chose to not have anything to do with fiber or not really worry about that because of the people watching this video, maybe 10% of you could tell me how much fiber you eat. And even within that, very few people probably get enough fiber to actually be able to cut it and be able to get something from that. I've talked to numerous coaches, David Wilson is one of them, where they've tried a fiber cut and they've just never seen good and consistent results versus just worrying about food volume. All we're caring about is food volume in your stomach. No fiber at all, don't care about that. Maybe your fiber is even higher than it normally is, don't care. All we are caring about is food volume. And the reason goes back to, again, I already kind of mentioned it, we have to choose things that we know that the vast majority of people, 80 to 90% of people watching this video, can be able to implement with the knowledge they currently have, which is how many calories do you eat and how many liquids do you drink. That's all we need to know. If I was to base it around fiber content, there's a lot of people who would probably not get much out of the gut cut because they don't know how much fiber they have, so there's no way to be able to even tell if they're fiber cutting, or 2, they don't get enough fiber in the first place. So yeah, I have zero concern about fiber. You may be eating more fiber than you're normally used to. That's completely fine. Don't really care. All I'm worrying about is the volume of food that you are eating. So moving on to the next question. Almonds have a lot of fiber. Isn't better something else cashew? So it's asking, would something else be better than almonds? So first and foremost, I already answered this. Don't care about the fiber. It's not something I track. So no, I would not choose cashews over almonds because of the fiber. But I chose this question because oddly enough, I didn't get asked the question that I thought I would get asked, that I get asked all the time, which is, can I do something other than almonds? Can I do cashews? Can I do peanuts? Can I do nut butters? And the answer is 100% yes. You can use any nut or nut butter. The reason for almonds is simply because of their accessibility and their variety. As well as the fact if you give someone too many choices, it becomes sometimes an issue. So it's easier to say, do almonds. But almonds are great because you can probably go to any convenience store or any grocery store or any gas station and find them. It's pretty easy to find them salted or unsalted based on what you may need. They come in a variety of flavors, so if you want to do chocolate covered almonds or barbecue roasted ones or jalapeno pepper, there's a lot of options. So it makes it really, really easy just to use those. But if you want to do cashews or something else, go for it. That is completely fine, as well as nut butters are fine too. The only issue there is the fact of 1, they're a little bit harder to travel with and prepare, and then 2, they're harder to weigh. So you can use them, but you just got to be accurate with understanding how to weigh them and all that stuff. But yeah, you can use any nut. It is not limited to just almonds. It's just that those are very easy to access. Next question is going to get into some food choices, and I think we got a couple questions maybe kind of based around this. Is I've seen other people do eggs instead of almonds. What's your take? Go for it. But egg yolks, not whole eggs. If you're doing whole eggs, that doesn't really fit the idea of the gut cut of eating very high or low density, high calorie foods. But if you do just egg yolks, that would be great. I think Sean Noriega actually touches on that in his gut cutting and weight cutting video on Powerlifting Now, which frankly is a more comprehensive video than the one I put out. If you want like the full detail of all your options, that's what you need to go check out. The reason I don't have a video that kind of goes through all that is I think the gut cut that was put out works great for what it's meant for, which is, again, working for the masses. The reason almonds is the choice is they are easily accessible. You can travel with them. There's a variety of flavors, and it's very, very easy to weigh. Egg yolks will work great, probably works even better. I would probably prefer that. That would be the more optimal choice, but you have to cook them. It's hard to travel with them. It's a little, I don't want to say it's harder to calculate and weigh them, but there's a bit more work to be able to do that, and you have to have a bit more accessibility versus there is basically no one that can't put almonds in a baggie and be able to take them where they need to and eat them when they want to. You can eat them while traveling, on a plane, whatever it may be. Egg yolks, a little bit harder to do, but if you can do them, egg yolks are a fantastic replacement for the almonds. Next question is actually 2 in 1 because they're kind of the same, is first, curious, did you come up with the term gut cut? And then second, how did you come up with it and the theory behind the calorie ratios? So I absolutely did not come up with this. I think I've become known as the poop guy, and that's my legacy now. But I in no way came up with this. No way am I claiming I came up with this. I did not make up the name. I don't know the actual originator, but I'll tell you where I got the original ideas from, and then how that kind of came to be from where I put out that video. Is the first time I had ever heard of this strategy was on a podcast of the TSA podcast, the Strength Athlete. I would link it below, but I went and looked for it. It's not on their podcast anymore. They don't have their older episodes, but they had I'm going to butcher this because I don't remember his name, but he was from Australia or some other country. It was a scientist, PhD, and he specialized in gut cut and gut content, working with like Olympic athletes, and he did the fiber-based gut cut. And it was an entire video based on that. And that was my first introduction into the thought of gut cutting. The other one that really kind of helped shape what I kind of put together was Tim Thibodeau had a video similar to mine prior. And he's where I kind of got the almonds thing from, which is a big staple of how this kind of works. He had removed, again, I would link his as well. He removed his YouTube channel and has a new one, so I don't have that access to that video anymore. But he's the one I saw using the almonds. I think he got that from someone else as well. But yeah, those two pieces of content, the podcast and then Tim's video, really kind of was my first introduction. And so from there, I just kind of experimented. I actually had a buddy, and we just kind of experimented. He was a coach himself, and we first tried the fiber content based one, and we kind of said, it was all right. It worked okay. He lost some weight, but it wasn't great. And then we tried more like the almond protein shake and what you see more today, and we saw a lot better results. And that's where it kind of came from. As for the calorie breakdown, the biggest place that comes from is basically if you were to go break down all the calories of the almonds and the protein shakes and the carbs that you're eating, I basically did that and tried to mimic it to what a normal macro breakdown would look like, as close as possible. It will not be perfect. It's going to be different from what you normally eat, and it's a little bit more carb-based, and that's partially the point, because you need more carbs that week of the meat versus at that point proteins and fats are not as useful. But I was, for the most part, trying to match what a normalized macro breakdown would look like for someone, and that's where I kind of came up with the breakdowns. Why I actually shifted it. The original video, I have different percentage breakdowns than what I actually have in the current spreadsheet, which I'll link below because I'm going to reference that a couple times throughout this video. A little bit, I kind of brought down, I believe, the almonds and the protein shakes, or maybe brought up the protein shakes and brought down the almonds, and then increased the carbs a bit, because again, it was mainly just saying, okay, here's what normalized macros would probably look like, and I'm going to try and manipulate these percentages, be as close as that, so that you're not drastically altering your macro breakdown those 3 days leading into the meet. The next question is, what would you consider to be too big of a cut for a lightweight female? And I'll assume gut cut, because there's things you can do past what I've covered in these videos to be able to continue to further cut weight, albeit they're going to be a bit more detriment on your performance, things like extreme sodium and water manipulation, sauna, stuff like that. So how much is too much? Generally, I would say most people should not be cutting more than 5%. Or else you're probably going to be needing, or 5% of your body weight. So that's going to obviously differ for a lightweight female of what is 5% versus like a heavyweight male. And if you're going to go above that, you're likely going to be needing to add additional things like sauna, sodium manipulation, things like that, which are going to have more detriment on your performance. So what you can really look at is I have a whole breakdown on the spreadsheet that I'll link for the gut cut, and it shows the general breakdown of 3%, 4%, and 5%, and likely some general recommendations of what you're going to have to do extra based on all of it. So my recommendation for anyone, but especially probably for lightweight females, because you're going to probably get less out of a gut cut because you're generally eating less calories on average than someone who's heavier, is about 3%. I would say 3% is the sweet spot. You can do 4%, and then 5% is going to be a little bit of a stretch. I would definitely try to not go over 5%. I've had some people do it, and it really just depends. If you're eating enough calories, if your food is very, very like whole food based, you probably can get enough out of that 5%, especially if you drink a lot of water. So there's a lot more to be able to cut on water, things like that. So somewhere between 3 to 5% is where I'd recommend. Under 3%, awesome. It's going to be super easy. Over 5% body weight, it's going to be something where you're probably going to need to add more strategies into play. Next question, super common question I get, because this is a very big concern. And again, going back to why this is not a dietary recommendation, you need to check with the doctor, whoever it may be, to make sure that you can do this appropriately if you do choose to do this, is if allergic to nuts, what would you suggest substituting for the almonds? Because yeah, if you're allergic to nuts, do not eat the almonds. That would be very bad. So I already mentioned it, egg yolks would be great. That would be one, but like I said, that is a little bit harder to do because you obviously have to be able to cook them. They're a little less accessible, all that kind of stuff. If you do not want to do the egg yolks, usually what I recommend is just dispersing those calories a bit more to the protein shakes and the almonds. That's option number one. It may not work as well. There may be, I mean, you're getting more liquid calories, so it's also a bit tough to manage that within a water load, but that would be the option possibly. And where I would do that is I'd take of the almond calories, I would take 30% of those and distribute in the protein shakes and 70% to the carbs. Again, that's not going to work as well. It may just be something if you cannot do the egg yolks that this isn't just going to be a good option for you for cutting, and you might actually maybe even bias more towards a fiber-based cut, which I don't have content on, but I believe other people do. Next question is how to know if I need to water load, because I think I mentioned in the original video, like you have the option of doing both or just one. I've had some people just water load. I've had some people just gut cut. I've even had some people just gut cut for one day. That could be a whole video of kind of being able to determine how long the gut cut needs to be and if you even need to do the full extent of it. But when I know for sure I'm going to do both, the gut cut and the water load, is if you're cutting 3% body weight or more. That's when I'm for sure going to do it. If you're cutting less than 3%, you should trial this to see if you lose enough off just the gut cut alone. But on average, I would say the typical person can, 3%, less than 3% body weight cut, that you can usually do the gut cut and get all they need from that and not have to manipulate water at all, which is nice because then it makes it a little bit easier that you don't have to load and then taper off of that. But 3% or more, I would add that water load process in. And then our final question is day of guide for morning versus afternoon weigh-in. And what I think this means, is I've gotten this question often, is if you're weighing in the morning, 8 a.m., 6 a.m., whatever it may be, you have a morning session versus the polar opposite, you have a prime time session at nationals or whatever it may be, there's a big span and difference of how you might need to set up the cut because that could be 8 to 10 hours difference. So a couple strategies here. I'll start with if it's in the morning because that's the simple one. That's where the original gut cut was set up to kind of go about, is that you're probably going to make sure the night before, assuming a meat, let's go assume a meat's on a Saturday, the Friday night, try to get all of the required liquids and food in by like 5 or 6 p.m. so that then you are fasting until weigh-ins till 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. the next day. You're still going to have all the nutrients you need, but you're going to have a bigger gap where you can basically unload some of that weight, especially the water weight, to be able to make weight. Now, if you have an afternoon or even an evening session, that's where it can slightly differ, and there's a couple strategies we can use. One is, I think people overestimate what having the fast is going to do to them. I mean, every single lifter who's ever done a prime time session likely has had the fast if they're cutting weight for a bit, and they all do fine. They're all some of the best lifters in the world. I think people don't like that because they're not used to it, but you'd be shocked how little that likely affects you. I mean, with that, let's say you have let's do a 4 p.m. weigh-in. We'll use that as the example on a Saturday. The main difference, at least the number one option, or first option, not number one, but the first option I would do is just don't cut off your calories and your liquids the night before by 5 or 6. Have them all the way through the night, or not all the way through the night, but all the way until you go to bed so that you're not fasting so long, because then you have plenty of time throughout the day to be able to shed the rest of that weight. The second option is to be able to plan to overcut a little bit. If you really do not want to have to fast during the day until your whatever 4 p.m. weigh-in, overcut a little bit so that you can be able to add some wiggle room to be able to have some carbs. That's what you care about that day. Protein and fat on meat day really don't do much. So prioritize carbs, and then liquids, and if there can be sodium within that in some way too. But yeah, just overcut a little bit. Plan to be a ½ kilo lighter than needed, or maybe even a kilo lighter, so that you can be able to have some food and liquids throughout the day leading into it as needed. The next option is shift your sleep schedule. If you know you're competing at 6 p.m. at a prime time session and you're weighing in at 4 p.m., throughout that week, just shift your sleep schedule to go to bed later, wake up later, so that that isn't 4 p.m. Now it's maybe more like 12 p.m. to you because you shifted things by 3 or 4 hours. And then the last option that I've used with some people is that let's say you had a 4 p.m. weigh-in. I'm going to count the day of the meet as one of the days of the gut cut / water load. So I'm basically going to shift everything. knowing that that day we are still considering ourselves to be trying to lose weight. And it just kind of depends on the person. The water load is specifically the one that I'll shift sometimes, because if we're already cutting water the day before to, like, let's say a half gallon, then you're doing another day where you're basically not drinking at all. You're basically doing 2 days of no water. So I'll usually shift the water load so it starts only 3 days prior versus 4 days prior, so that the actual like low liquid day is the day of the meet, since you're going all the way to 4 p.m. And then you could also do that with the gut cut if you'd want to, because it just kind of depends on the person and how much you're cutting, but you could shift everything knowing that the day of the meet is part of your gut cut, and you could plan that 4 p.m. is your weigh-in time, not in the morning. Everything's usually based off of that morning and night weigh-in, or morning weigh-in, and then tracking what you're doing at night. You could literally shift everything and weigh in at 4 p.m. and base everything throughout the entire process off that 4 p.m. So that is the Q&A over the gut cut. I'm sure there are a lot more questions. What I'd recommend, if you have more questions, first, go check the gut cut video. There's got to be at least 300 plus comments there that I've answered almost every single one of them. So make sure to check there. I've answered tons of questions there, and you're probably going to find most of your answers there. If not, feel free to ask below, and I'll see if I'll be able to help. As always, make sure to subscribe if you have not already. Give the video the like if you enjoyed it, and then share with anyone you might feel like this could be useful for. But otherwise, until next time, peace.